What's up, guys, and welcome to another episode of the Powerhouse Mentality podcast. I'm your host. I'm Caitlin Kenneth Smith, and today we have an awesome conversation lined up. And joining me today is Diamond Drip, and she's a specialist in human design, gene keys, and has a super passion for mental health. Now, today we're going to talk a little bit about the power of understanding energetic blueprints, reflecting on trauma, and even diving into the role of psilocybin for mental health. So, Diamond, welcome to the show.
It is so great to be here with you and our listeners today.
I'm so excited for this. But really, let's dive in here because I know that there's a lot that we want to cover. But first, I want to ask you, could you give us a little bit of background on yourself and how you came to specialize in all these super unique areas of human design key things?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I made a pivot in my business from product-based to service-based, I chose to go into a coaching model. And what I originally started out with was business and mindset coaching. And as we know from online networking, that space is very saturated.
Yes.
And so I was really trying to figure out what my superpower was. What was my unique value proposition? What was the thing that set me apart from other business and mindset coaches? And it was through this really a continuation of personal development, self-discovery, et cetera. Because like you mentioned, and I'm sure we'll get into, I participated in a clinical trial that used psilocybin that healed my depression back in August of 2022. And so I really was already on this like kind of personal growth development. Like how do I fulfill my purpose here? And then the
Hmm.
business thing naturally. And that was how someone sent me a tool. It was just a calculator. And they were like, yeah, you enter your birth information in, it'll give you this blueprint, it'll tell you how your energy is. And I was like, oh, that seems like it'd be helpful as an entrepreneur. So yeah,
Hmm.
let's give it a go. And the tool that I used is not as detailed as the tool that is on my website right now. And so it left me with a lot of questions. I was like, what does it mean to be a generator? Why is there this fraction looking number? What do all of these things mean? And I had a lot of questions, as many people do when they look at their body graph chart for the first time. And I immediately went to YouTube University so I could start getting a better understanding of what this tool is and how it can help. And from the very first thing that I searched, what does it mean to be a generator in human design? Um, and it started talking about when we're doing work that we love, we literally generate so much energy that it like bubbles up and spills out of us into the people that we're around, into the things that we're doing. I was like, oh, that's me. That's what people have said my whole life. Like, we're on to something. And just everything that I found, I was like, there's no way I can't bring this into what I'm doing in business because there are so many people who are not confident in what it is that they bring. They're undervaluing their solutions, they're undervaluing themselves. And I'm like, this tool helps with that. So I have to figure out a way to blend it, even though blending spirituality and business. Uh,
It's messy for a lot of people, and I love that you did that because, like you said in the beginning, this space is so saturated with just coaching in general, like whether it be business or fitness and nutrition. But there are so many people out there, and you have to be unique and different and show the world that, hey, I have this tool that's going to actually help you be able to develop into the person I know you can be.
Yeah.
But the people just lack the confidence, and that's why so many people remain stuck. And if you can help them get their confidence, then that's huge.
It's been really awesome. Like because everything that I learn about human design, I'm mostly learning because I'm like diving into something about my design. And then, in doing that, I learn things about other people's like stuff. And it's like, it gives me so much joy that I get to share these tools because it helps with mental health, as we'll talk about. It helps with business, but it actually helps with your health as well.
Yeah,
So
it's all connected, like
mhm.
mental, spiritual, people real don't realize when it comes to fitness and nutrition specifically and being like the healthiest version of yourself, there are different pillars. You have nutrition, you have movement, but then people don't realize you also have spiritual health and mental health that really do contribute to those things.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So you got into this all because you were almost doing this for yourself and then you were like, "Oh, well I can actually help people here." And I think that a lot of people that's how they get into coaching, right? Is
Yeah.
they have their own experience. So tell me a little bit about all of the stuff that you were dealing with back in 2022, right? When you started this whole journey.
Yeah, so in 2022, I was a business owner of two businesses. I had started a side hustle in graphic design. I was building the product-based business. My daughter was a toddler. She was like 3 or 4. And I was also in school getting my visual communications degree. And
Shit, you were
so,
doing it all.
right? Right.
That's like, I'm sorry, but like superhero a little bit.
So, and there are, the stories that we tell ourselves, they really do hold us back sometimes because it was really hard for me back then to think about giving up anything because I was like, so many people, they look and they're like, you're in school, you're momming, you're running businesses, like you're amazing. And I thought that if I gave any one of those things up, people would think I was less than amazing, right?
Hmm. Yeah, you were basing your
External.
worth off of like what other people would think of you.
Exactly. So that was one of the things that I was going through, which when I found these tools about a year ago now, I was actually in life coaching working on some of those same things. But in 2022, I was just really dealing with a lot of passive suicidal thoughts. I actually found that out in the trial. Um, I was diagnosed when I was 14 with bipolar II disorder. And so I was used to the mood fluctuations. I'd been
Mhm.
hospitalized, I'd been on meds before. Um, and it was one of those things where I just really wanted some relief. I just really, and I had heard about psilocybin. I was already into natural medicine at the time because I had my medical cannabis card. And so I was using that to treat I like to say I was using the cannabis to treat the symptoms, the insomnia, the not wanting
Yeah,
to eat, all of those things, but it wasn't
yeah.
actually addressing the root cause. And I really wanted to address the root cause, and also help people at the same time be able to educate people who look like me, because there aren't a lot of people who are diverse people of color who are talking about psilocybin, who are talking about psychedelics and how it
Mhm.
can help mental health. And so, as a consequence, not many of them are trying it. Not many of them are getting the benefits.
Yeah, I haven't heard too much. Like I've heard a little bit about it. Like I've heard it mentioned like on a ton of podcasts that I listen to,
Mhm.
just like in brief, like how it's starting to like come about because I live in Florida and I've lived in North Carolina. I've lived in New York, so I'm like, it's not like a big thing where I'm at. But like how really, because I know we're bouncing around here, but how really has psilocybin helped you, or how could it potentially help other people? And kind of like give people a breakdown of what it is. Because like if I heard psilocybin like a year ago, I probably would have no idea what it is because I'm just like I just don't know things like that, you know?
Yeah, so psilocybin is the active component in magic mushrooms. And so what happens when you take psilocybin is it creates new neural connections in your brain. It
Hmm.
also helps like boost your mood. It helps to reduce the default mode network, which is where our ego is housed, which makes us more compassionate, which makes us more empathetic to those around us and ourselves. And so those are just a few benefits of psilocybin itself. And so when I participated in the trial, the number one thing that it did was the dark cloud that had been following me since the diagnosis, that depression that was only getting worse year after year, because I wasn't treating the root cause. The trial actually helped me remove that cloud.
Hmm.
And I talk about often like because obviously not a lot of people have done clinical trials. So people are like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
how is it? So one of the things that I talk about is, I really didn't realize how unhappy I was until after, because I was so happy. Like for the first time in my entire life, I danced in the shower after,
Yeah. I
after.
think that a lot of people are kind of in that position where they don't realize how much pain they're truly in because they've just almost found comfort in that pain. Like
Yeah,
whether it be like, people who are struggling with anxiety, depression, trauma that they haven't addressed, or even like somebody who's extremely overweight or unhealthy. You just don't know until you realize how good you could feel.
yeah, exactly. And so that was one of the main things. Second to that, I say that it was the catalyst because it really helped me connect to these more spiritual things. Like I had heard about horoscopes, like we all have at some point in our lives. And
Hmm.
like the spirituality things, those I was one of those people who would call it like woo woo. But now I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, now that's like a keyword for me. I'm like, oh, woo. What woo specifically are we talking about? Because I'm
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people
in
too, they kind of like are in that. I think a lot of people are becoming more open to it now because of like social media, like
Yeah,
bringing us awareness to things like this. But a lot of times you would hear this stuff like 10 years ago and be like, okay,
right.
sure. like questioning that person's sanity, right? But I've heard that psilocybin specifically can be very helpful in the treatment of trauma in that
Yes,
specific because let's be honest, everybody has trauma. Most people aren't addressing said trauma, and then they walk around in their life and their body is responding as if the trauma had just happened.
exactly. And it does help with trauma. I was in therapy for years before the trial.
Mhm.
Obviously, during the trial, they assigned me a therapist. We worked through some very specific intentions that I was setting for that trip. But I would say the work that I had done in therapy the years before to work through the trauma, the only things that were still keeping me stuck were like stories that I was telling myself that had been like rooted in whatever that trauma
Mhm.
was. Like I thought that I had healed the trauma, but there were still these underlying things. And so that was one of the things that the trial actually helped was like it helped me rewrite some of those stories so that I could actually let myself be okay and recognize those things happen to me, but they don't define me. I've healed from them and I've forgiven those people because at the end of the day, my sanity is what's important. And so the trial helped me to kind of work through or I guess solidify some of the work that I had done in therapy
Mhm.
years prior.
And I think that's so important too, because kind of what you said is like these stories that we tell ourselves. And a lot of that comes down to like limiting beliefs that we have formed throughout our childhood. Like we think that we're not enough because somebody made us feel that way, when in all reality, it was like that person was just not trying to do that, but it was the way that we were telling the story to ourselves because of our confidence.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
that's a lot of what psilocybin and these tools and self-awareness really, like the self-awareness piece is the key thread in all of this because the more
hmm
aware we are, the more that we can take action to change it.
Yeah, self-awareness is super important. And that's kind of where like that human design and the gene keys kind of come in so that you become more aware of like, okay, this is the energy that I'm putting out and this is how I can make the most of it. So with the human design stuff, like how exactly does that work? Because you say like there's a quiz that you take or like a test that you take and it kind of gives you like, this is what you are, but what does that mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So, from human design, you can learn lots of things about yourself, namely how your energy flows. Like, how are you designed to be brought opportunities in life? How is the universe, how are people designed to bring you opportunities? It also gives you insight into how you make your best, most aligned decisions. And this is something called strategy and authority. This is really the biggest piece of human design because from there, if you just live by your strategy and authority, you're already embodying like the traits and the gifts and all of the things that are in your design if you're just working on those two things alone. But for listeners, it tells you what your purpose is, what deeply fulfills you, what you're here to do in this lifetime, what you're here to learn. It tells you who you're designed, and this is especially helpful for entrepreneurs. It tells you who you're designed to be around and who you're designed to see, and what, based on your unique design, what are the solutions and the wisdom that you're here to nourish the people who you're designed to see and be around so that you can be prosperous in this lifetime so that you can continue to show up in service. It tells you the types of things that you should be speaking to in your marketing, all the way down to why you might, fight for certain things. Like I have human design is a synthesis of a bunch of different sciences, and one of them is astrology, astronomy. And so, in one of my planetary things, I have this gate of the fighter. And so, it makes me want to fight for things that have meaning and purpose. And I've
hmm
always known that, but
Right.
actually like see the number, understand the gate, understand the questions that I can ask myself when I'm feeling stuck in that energy. Because we have the gift version, but then when we're not living in it, there's a repressive shadow, there's a reactive shadow that we might be operating in response to whatever's going on. So it just gives you these insights that help you navigate life and really move through it with less resistance. So
Mm.
many of us are stressed out, burnt out, because we're living against the way we were designed.
Yeah, and a lot of us just don't have direction or purpose. Like the amount of times where somebody tells me like they're depressed or they're anxious, and a lot of it comes back to like I'm not feeling fulfillment in my life because I don't know what my purpose is. And I think that so many people spend the majority of their life trying to just search for this purpose, but they never find it truly, and they live their life just kind of living it
Yeah.
instead of actually experiencing everything that they possibly could. And it sounds like this human design framework or this blueprint kind of gives you the direction that you need to like, okay, this is where I should be looking for where my purpose could be, or this is the type of people I should be surrounding myself with, or like when I feel stuck, okay, I know kind of the direction to go in, and this kind of gives me like literally a blueprint to go.
Yeah, exactly. And it teaches you to really slow down because one of the core concepts is the mind versus the wisdom of the body and how culturally we've been conditioned to rely on the mind for our decision making. But really there's so much wisdom, there's so much stored experience that can help us navigate. And so it also helps, kind of embody universal laws that we hear about all the time, law of attraction, law of oneness, etc., because you really start to surrender to this process that we are a collective consciousness. And the more that we do, the more that we show up in service in our gifts, it's only going to help those around us as well. So
Mhm.
it's so many things, but
Yeah, it sounds super interesting. And it definitely seems like it could really help people work through like different limitations that they're struggling with, which is like one of the biggest things we're about here at the Powerhouse Mentality. It's like, hey, take action because nobody's going to be able to do it for you. But sometimes people feel almost frozen in the sense where they can't take action. And they're like, Caitlin, I want to take action, but I don't know what to take action on or when to do it or what to do. And they overthink it. So at least this gives them direction.
yeah. And then the gene keys, it just
Hmm.
really takes a look. So human design comprises like 8 to 10 different sciences.
Right.
And then Gene Keys, it really looks at the Chinese I Ching and quantum physics. And
Hmm.
so it's this foundation that every single gate in human design that you have, it has a different frequency. And depending on how far out of alignment you are, how deep in your conditioning you are, you're either going to be in the shadow, the gift, or the city. And so one of the things that I have loved is that the gene keys, it gives you a context to look at some of the shadows, the more challenging areas of your life. And it kind of gives you insight into how you can live in the gift in the future. Human design is very practical. It's like, this is, this is your design. These are your gates. These are your gifts. But Gene Keys is very contemplative. It's very much for people who like to kind of sit, kind of chew on things, not to dissect, not to judge, but just to observe what their experience has been and how they can be better in more alignment.
Hmm. So these things like completely complement each other then.
They do. They
So
do.
can you have one without the other, really?
I think if I had to pick one, it
Hmm.
would be human design, just
Hmm.
because you can contemplate the gates themselves. I think Gene Keys adds that extra layer, but if I were picking one, human design.
Hmm. So how does like reflecting on life's experiences and traumas using gene keys or through the gene keys, how can that help individuals kind of gain a new perspective towards their life? Because perspective is super powerful, and I think that like perspective really is the key to anything in life. Like how could that help them?
Yeah, exactly. Yes. So I'm in the Venus sequence right now. There are 3 sequences in Gene Keys. And so in Venus, we start with the purpose sphere first. Is where we ended in the activation and is where we start. And so the activation is more like I was talking about what you're here to do, learn, what deeply fulfills you, what satisfies you.
Hmm.
And then in the Venus, it's all about your karma, your dharma, your emotional intelligence, your SQ, like all of the relationship kind of things. That's really what the Venus sequence dives into. And so in my sphere of purpose, it's all about transforming the shadow of failure into the gift of preservation. And
Hmm.
at its highest level is veneration. And so some people in the retreat, they have partners, some people don't. You really don't need one in order to go through this, but I do. And so it really helped me to slow down and look at different areas in my relationship where maybe and this is kind of through the programming partner in the activation sequence of like releasing the shadow of expectation into the gift of detachment and at its highest level is celebration. So it really allowed me to look at areas where my expectation was something because of
Hmm.
what I had culturally learned about relationships, about gender roles, etc. And then because we didn't live up to that, instead of seeing it as a failure, I could look at it and say, well, what can we preserve here? Where is this belief really coming from? And so, even in your relationships, it can be so helpful because it allows you to get that deeper understanding of what is really going on when these two energies interact with each other.
Yeah, and I think that's such a big problem that people have is like they just don't have proper communication with their partner or understand like the energy that that person's putting off. So like I like to use the example of, you think your spouse is mad at you because they slammed the door on the way out, but in all reality it was just the wind blew the wrong way and the door slammed and now you're creating this story in your head.
Yeah.
And it's because we have these false expectations for a relationship should be when in all reality it's like, hey, it depends on the individual and it really just depends on you doing the work.
Exactly. And that's really what they're talking about so much. We're entering into the second sphere now, and there's six of them. And it's really just what are your relationships here to teach you? What are they here to mirror back to you? Where can you improve? Where can you release judgment? Where can you release your opinion and really embrace empathy instead?
hmm So you work with clients on these two things, on the gene keys and the human design. Now, do you have any like specific examples, whether it be like your personal story or from people you've worked with, where reflecting on trauma through through the gene keys has actually helped with like emotional breakthroughs or anything like that?
So we don't go in with that specific focus of working on
Yeah.
trauma because a lot of what I do is brand strategy. So we get them to understand themselves so that they can present their solutions to
Ooh,
the
even
world.
better though, like do you have
Yeah.
an example with that? Because I think that's another big thing is because everybody wants to be an entrepreneur nowadays. So.
Yes. So I had somebody, they put an offer out. Well, they designed a landing page and then they put it out for
Mhm.
feedback. And she got some decent feedback on the first time around. And then I gave some insights into what she could speak to more based on what was in her Mercury, what she could speak to more in terms of the people that she's actually designed to see in her environment. Like, what are some things that you can pick out? And then she redid it. She redid
Mhm.
the launch. She put a video on there because, as we know, videos help us connect with people more,
Yes.
especially for the brand. Um, and she sent it out again to test it. And I was able to like highlight all of the things that she did really well. And we actually learned today, because this was like 2 days ago, we learned today that in that second test that she sent out, one person actually, because the link, I guess, still worked. Like we didn't test the links, but the link worked and the person signed up for her mastermind. And then somebody else was like, oh my gosh, I've been wanting to work with you for so long. I'm going to sign up on Friday, even though she's
Mhm.
not technically launching until Monday. So she actually had to tell the person who didn't sign up but said they would. She was like, technically, it's Monday, so we can get all this back office stuff done. But that's really what awareness can do is when you're, because they're so natural to us that we don't think anything about it. So we're
Right.
like, yeah, whatever. This is what we're putting out. And then you like, no, you do this really well. You bring this in. This is in your what you're here to communicate. And then it's like, oh, I guess I could talk about that more. And then it makes this thing click and actually
Mhm.
resonate.
Yeah, because I feel like when it comes down to like branding and when it comes to being an entrepreneur, you have to really focus on the emotional side of things because the reality is people buy with their emotions, right? So you have to make sure you're connecting with your audience the right way. And like if you're connecting with them better through the energy that you're putting out because you're putting out what's true to yourself, I think that's super important.
Exactly. So, that's a perfect example. The trauma pieces, like if we get to something, like I had one client, I don't do this much anymore, but we went through her whole human design chart, all of the gates,
Mhm.
all of the centers, and so some stuff naturally, like when we got towards the end and we started talking, because some of the planets are about generational things that we bring into this incarnation. And so, that brought up some kind of, oh, relationship with my mom stuff. And then in working through
Yeah.
that, it actually helped. And I think that this is important because we are whole leaders. We're whole beings. So the breakthrough that she had actually created space for her to have a conversation with her mom, which bettered the relationship with her mom, which when we're happy in all of these areas of our life, we show up better in our business.
Yeah, people don't realize how important the inner work is, and it's the work most people don't want to do because it's kind of messy and it's a little bit painful. But if you continue to just bury things down forever and ever, it's never going to go away. It's just going to keep popping up when you don't want it to. And that could lead to like when you're trying to build a business or build a brand, it's like all these feelings that you're having of, oh, I can't do this and all this doubt. I mean, that's just not productive.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
so I want to get back a little bit into like your personal story with mental health and like the psilocybin. So I know we touched on the whole clinical trial that you did, but can you share a little bit about like what that experience was like for you and how you actually got to it in the first place?
Yeah, so I was at the gym. I was watching a Red Table Talk episode. How nice. I was at the gym and we're
Yeah, that's
goodness.
funny.
But I was watching a Red Table Talk episode and they had Michael Pollan on who wrote the book. It's a very long title, but if you just search Michael Pollan, How to Change Your Mind, it'll come up. But it's like how what science has taught us about, psychedelics and everything like that. And the core uh it's not audience, the core people, talk show people.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm like, what are they called?
Yeah.
Hosts, I guess. The core hosts, they're all African American because it's Jada Pinkett Smith, her mom. Sometimes she has other people on the co-host. And the mom asked, she's like, well, why don't we see more African American people talking about how this helps? And they started talking about the reasons. One was safety, just
Mhm.
people don't feel safe in their own homes, like sleeping at night sometimes. So
Yep, I've been there.
so going off and disconnecting from reality may not always feel like the safest thing to do. But then the
Mhm.
other piece was, the fact that they don't see more people talking about them. And so as a way to bridge this gap, they talked about this kind of guide program that you could do through maps.org, which is all about advancing psychedelic science. It was, I forget how much it was, but it was over like $3,000, something like that. And there was no guarantee that once you went through this certification through them, you would have clients to guide and help. And I was
Yeah, that's the tricky thing with like all these like master classes, right? It's like a promise, right? Because at the end of the day, you have to do the work that goes with it.
exactly. And at the time I was like, as I said, was already running two businesses. So, you know,
Just tap something else on there too, because you're a mom, you're in school, you're doing all these things, so might as well
right?
just tap something else on there.
Exactly. So the other suggestion was going to clinicaltrials.gov and participating in a clinical trial because one of the barriers, especially when it comes to safety, is the fact that psilocybin psychedelics are a Schedule I substance, which means that they have no medical use, they're highly addictive, and psilocybin and cannabis are right up there with meth and cocaine and heroin.
Mhm.
Which
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of people's hesitation is because like I remember having a conversation with it with like my mom and she was like, "Whoa, that sounds kind of wild." Like I'm not somebody who's going to do that, but like I know that a lot of people have found good things with it, but like I have like drug addiction in my family in the past, so it's like something that I feel like a lot of people too would be weary to go because of like where it's categorized, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly why the clinical trials are in existence because the
Hmm.
actuality is that they're not, well, psilocybin is not one of those highly addictive substances. It
Hmm.
actually has a lot of medical benefit. There just aren't studies, there just isn't research because of the scheduling,
Right.
namely, that help to get this message out. So I was like, well, if I'm taking chances,
Yeah.
I'm
Gotta
I
risk it. That's what life is all about, right? I mean, that's like the entrepreneur in you, right? It's like I kind of got to risk it in order to see like, is this going to work? Is it not? If it doesn't, cool, we learn from it, we grow. But if it does, then you can move so much further in your life.
right. And actually have this scientific backing versus like recreationally just talking about how it did for me.
Hmm.
Like, no, I went through the steps, I drug tested, they, had me in the hospital room, all of the things that give it that credibility that people need so desperately because of the scheduling. It just really worked out. And I attribute so many things to that trial, but it really helped me to see that when you are excited about something, when you take a risk, and this comes from human design too, like doing what you love, leaning into what lights you up, like when you do those things, so many more things come from that. Like, because I did the trial, I that was one of the reasons why I started my YouTube channel, was just so I could document the process of like preparing for the trial, going
Yeah.
through it. I knew that I was going to do an experience at home just so I could see, what do they do in the clinical setting that you can do at home as well? And will you still get the same results? And through doing that channel, just because I wanted to share information, because that was the whole reason why, well, one of the reasons, right? I also wanted to be cured of depression.
Yeah, right. And that was probably the biggest reason. But it's also everybody likes a good story and likes to
Yeah.
follow a journey. That's like one of the things we'll call it trending on social media right now is like people really like to see like the whole process through something because it's almost like they're living it, but they don't have to actually live it, you know?
Exactly. And so that was one of the reasons why I started it. And it ended up someone found me and we ended up doing a partnership. They work at a radio station.
Hmm.
They had a bit on the air that we did an interview and she recorded pieces and then it was published online. And then someone from Oxford found me because they're doing their
Super
own.
cool.
Yeah. So it's like one of those things where, like, literally from this enjoyment, this excitement, all of these other things are happening as well.
Hmm. People don't realize how like you can build something off of just like something that you're super passionate about,
Yeah.
but you have to kind of put yourself out there and, like you said, take the risk to actually do it. So with doing this clinical trial, not only did it like help you to actually like cure your depression, but it also helped you to build yourself like business wise and everything like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nice. I mean, coming off of like doing this, how long was the trial actually?
Yeah, it was 15 weeks.
Okay.
Most of it was getting ready and then integration afterwards. The actual dosing day was only 1 day for 8 hours.
Okay. And how was the dosing day?
It was interesting. So they do it in a 3 day kind of situation where the
Yeah.
first day you go in, you take your last drug test, you put the sleep shades on, you get comfortable with the room.
Hmm.
They have a co-pilot program so that just in case the therapist who you've been getting to know intimately over the past few weeks to prepare, if they have to use the bathroom, if they have to take a phone call, there's
Right.
somebody else that you're going to know and be familiar with. So you meet that person the day before, and you do some final scales, some final questionnaires. Then the dosing day, I went early, and it almost felt like I woke up to eat and then go back to sleep, even though I wasn't really asleep. I was just in this
Yeah.
dream
Like
state.
in this weird daisy state kind of thing.
Just kind
Interesting.
of laying there. And then afterwards, they got me food. We did some more scales. And then day three was really the beginning of the integration. So they encourage you to journal the day of so that you can bring those journalings into therapy and really start to unpack and process those things.
Mhm. So is it kind of like similar in the sense to like, have you heard of EMDR therapy?
I have. Mhm.
Is it similar to that in a sense where you're like kind of like going back to these moments and kind of like processing them?
If those are the intentions that you set.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
Depending on like what exactly you're working through. So when you got out of this clinical trial, did you feel like it was like an immediate like, oh my gosh, I feel so much better? Or was it like, okay, a couple days later we have to kind of work through things? No, it was like immediate.
Yeah, there was because there's the afterglow,
Right.
especially when you're not on anything mind altering. So that was one of the things I couldn't smoke. I was already not on antidepressants, but they have you get off of those things. So when it's really that pure like experience of like just the psilocybin, nothing else, it's one of those things where it does have a longer afterglow, which is why a lot of people who participate in trials, they will only have one hero dose, one experience
Hmm.
dose, which is 5 grams or more. And some of them are good for the rest of their lives because during that afterglow, during those feel good feelings, during those core um, moments of reprogramming those neural pathways, they were able to rewrite some of those old stories, and that has served them long term. So I would say, I would say that integration is probably one of the most important pieces. And I
Hmm.
think that's why right now, like research is being done, like can you have the experience without having the experience, which I think is one of like the wildest things. I learned
Mm.
about this when she was writing the article. Like she was like they're trying to figure out how they can take away like the visualizations and the distortion and things like that and just get the benefits. And I'm like, it's through that altered state of consciousness that you receive some of the most profound insights. So like,
Yeah, it sounds a little counterproductive if you're trying to take away the experience because
yeah.
I think the experience is what actually gives the benefits, right?
So, but it'll be interesting to see what studies, what research they do, to figure out how, if they can do that. But yeah.
Yeah, so so you've had this incredible experience with yourself with helping you with like the bipolar and the depression. Now, like 2 years later, are you still like feeling the benefits and like not really struggling much with the bipolar, or do you still have like good days, bad days?
Yeah, no. So since the trial, good days. The only thing that I will say, and this has been one of my rabbit holes, is through the natural ebb and flow of my cycle, especially during the luteal phase, I will
Hmm.
have, those tiredness, those more depressed. But at the end of the day, that's hormonal.
Yeah,
And
and that's pretty normal, I think, for most people too, right? It's just
yes.
like we have like one week during the month where we feel good.
Yeah, we feel like we're on top of the world. But
Hmm.
aside from that, no, I can honestly say that it's one of those things that has been a true catalyst and it continues to give.
So I think that like listening to your story, you definitely are like you believe that there is a huge potential for psilocybin for mental health, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what do you think that that's going to come to? Like, what would you like to see it do? And I know that like you mentioned like microdosing too, and how that could be a potential benefit on like a big scale. Like, what do you think about all that?
Yeah, so microdosing is like less than zero point 0.5 grams. And so you're not going to get any of those visualizations, but you will get some of those like brain effects that I
Right.
was speaking to earlier. And I'm excited. I don't really know what to expect. I've kind of released that thinking of the future because then I get attached to it. But I'm excited simply because I know that the descheduling is going to happen. Like I know it's going to happen at some point, especially with so many people pushing like locally, like cannabis is on its way to being descheduled. So it's one of those things where I'm looking forward to more people having access to these things and for like in this time of cultivation for educators to really start making themselves known about the benefits of how to use these things safely, whether it
Hmm.
is like in a retreat setting, whether it's like I just see so much potential for how it can really just help the collective. So many of us are living in our egos and we see that so much with rush hour traffic and other things.
Hmm.
So I just feel like if people just embraced more empathy, they rewrote some of those old stories, I just feel like we would just be happier as a collective.
Yeah, it sounds like the world would be a little bit of a better place if we kind of just let go of our ego a little bit.
Just a little bit.
Awesome. Well, this has been such an incredible conversation. But before we wrap it up, I really want to know, like, do you have any final thoughts on how all of this, like, interconnectedness of mental health, spiritual health, and breaking free from limiting beliefs, how that could really help somebody who maybe feels like they're kind of stuck?
Yeah, the one of the things that I will say is in understanding how your energy flows and understanding how to rewrite those old stories, things like there's just this light switch that almost happens. It's not immediately, it's not overnight, it takes a lot of work, but there's this switch that happens when you realize all of the stuff that you were holding on to was just so heavy, and
Mm.
you're able to recognize and to be in your awareness enough to feel the lightness and to say, you know what, no, I refuse any more heavy stuff. I'm not. And you're in your awareness and you get defensive of like, no, old pattern, no old habit, no old limiting belief. And it's
Yeah.
one of those things where it just continues to grow once you have that foundation.
Yeah, you can almost set boundaries with yourself. Like, people are bad at setting boundaries.
Yes.
Nice. Well, for those who are listening who want to start maybe their own journey or really like are like, oh, this sounds like it's perfect for me, where can they actually go to pull their human design chart from and learn a little bit more?
Yeah, my website is diamonddripconsulting.com, which I'm sure we'll put in the show notes.
Will
And
do.
it's literally the first thing right there. It's like, what's your chart?
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for sharing everything that you shared today. And I want to thank you again for coming onto the podcast. I know that everybody who's listening to this is going to walk away with so much value from this episode. And to everybody who is listening, thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like it, comment it, give Diamond a follow on all of her platforms. I'll make sure to put like any of your social medias down below. And go out and do one thing that's going to take you one step closer to where you want to be.